Hey guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're putting together a 386 SX retro gaming PC. We will look into more detail today. We will check out the main board, the I/O storage options, the video card, the sound card, Gotek floppy emulators, what sort of cables you need, and also how to deal with the AT power supply. So here we have the main board. It is the M396F version 2.2, and this is really a main board from the end of the 386 era. It's extremely compact, cost reduced. It doesn't have too many components, so it's very simple and streamlined, and I really like that. We have 6 ISA slots, 4 megabytes of RAM installed. Here's the BIOS. And the BIOS is actually, it doesn't have too many options. You can't tweak the clock speed and things like that. And there's nothing in there to change the performance or the timings for the RAM. It's very basic, but it has an option to auto detect the hard drive, which is very useful. Keyboard goes here. It did come with a leaking battery, which I removed and installed a new one, but you can remove this battery altogether and use an external battery pack. Here's the processor, 386 SX33 from AMD. We got headers here for reset, turbo LED, speaker, and power LED, and keyboard lock. And the chipset is from PC Chips. So I really like this mainboard. Nice and simple, not too many components that can go faulty. So that really resonates with me. And this is the video card we're using. It has a chip from Cirrus Logic, the GD5422, and it offers decent performance, a nice picture, good compatibility with old games, and these cards should also cost a little bit less, for example, compared to chasing something like a Zen ET4000. The memory can be upgraded for playing DOS games on a 386 SX. That is not necessary. That will unlock higher resolutions in Windows 3.11, for example. But for DOS gaming at 320 by 200, it doesn't really matter that we have less video RAM than what we could upgrade the card to. So before we continue looking at some of the other components, let's run some benchmarks and see what this machine can do. You can head to the Phil's Computer Lab website and download a DOS benchmark pack, and it has a menu system. You just press a few buttons and the benchmarks will spit out a score at the end. So in 3D Bench 1.0 we're getting 10 FPS, and that is perfect for old games like Wing Commander, just enough speed to be playable and have a decent frame rate. In PC Player Bench we're getting 2.1. Now the benchmark pack includes Doom with 2 options, highest details and lowest details. On a 386 SX, we're running it with the lowest details options, and we're getting 15.4 FPS. I also ran Norton System Information 8.0. We're getting 26.6. In the Landmark System Speed Test 6.00, we're getting 42 megahertz. In Top Bench 3.8, we're getting 63. So all around, this is a decent performance, and a ton of games will work really well on this machine. And this is the I/O controller, giving us things like ID and floppy, as well as serial and parallel ports. And there's also a game port connector here. Now, this one has a bank of jumpers here to configure the resources and turn features on and off, but it didn't come with any documentation. Luckily, I typed in Goldstar Prime 2 into Google, and it took me to a page from Stason.org, which has manuals for old computer parts. And yeah, the first link had exactly this I/O controller. And I left everything at default. The only jumper I changed was jumper 11 to turn off the printer port, because I wanted to use a sound card on interrupt 7. So we have an external parallel and serial port. There's an internal serial port header here. Floppy drive goes here. 2 ID devices can be attached here. So this one only has a primary ID controller. And here goes the game port, but I couldn't find a suitable cable. So we're actually using the game port on the sound card. And here's a jumper if you want to connect the ID activity LEDs. You will find the same jumpers basically on the main board, so you just have another option. To plug in your drives, make sure you take note of pin number 1. So here we have, for example, a floppy cable, and you can see this red wire here. That means this is pin number 1, so they have to line up. So just connect it like this. And we do the same thing for the ID drive. Now this is a modern 80-pin ID wire, and this pin will be solid. So just get a nail or something sharp and pierce it, otherwise you can't connect it. So pin number 1, so that means I need to rotate this around and also plug this into the I/O controller like that. And here, that's how you connect everything up, and we are good to go. If you have watched a few of my retro videos, you know that I love these Gotek floppy emulators. I use 2 devices. This one is the internal drive, so that connects to our Goldstar Prime 2 I/O controller. And then I've got another one which has a USB interface. This goes into my modern Windows 10 machine, and that lets me exchange information back and forth. So to begin, you insert the USB flash drive and you hold down both buttons then while turning on the computer, and it will format the USB flash drive with 1000 images. And then you can select between, with these buttons, from 0 to slot 999, giving you access to 1000 floppy images. And this is our storage device. We're using a SD card. This is an 8 GB SD card, and it converts to IDE. Now, the BIOS will pick up the entire capacity, but there's a limitation of 512 megabytes. So when we install MS-DOS 6.22, we only get a 512 megabyte capacity device. You can get around that with software, but for this video, 512 megabytes was all we needed to try out a few benchmarks and games. Performance is very good, especially access time is extremely fast. There's no noise, there is nothing, no mechanical parts that can fail, and very reliable. Also very convenient. You can just eject it, plug it into a card reader, copy across some games, and off you go. Now for this project, I thought an optical drive is not really necessary, but I wanted to see if it works, and it does. So this is a standard ID optical drive. I configured the drive as a slave by changing over the jumper, and it gets detected without any issues. And I tested good old the 7th Guest, which was one of the first PC CD-ROM games and has amazing graphics. Because this is a 386, we're running the VGA 320x200 resolution mode rather than the more demanding 640x480. To install MS-DOS, I usually go to the bootdisk.com website. Unfortunately, most of the download links aren't working anymore, so I use the Wayback Machine, and then I uploaded all the files onto a website. I'll put a link down below in the description. In terms of legality, Microsoft still has the rights for the software, of course, it's proprietary, but I classify this as I don't care where. So I think Microsoft doesn't really mind that the retro community is playing around with DOS. So I don't think there will be any issues. But of course, if there will be, then yep, I'll remove the link. Not a problem. Just get in touch with me. So I ran the MS-DOS 6.22 executable with the Gotek, the USB Gotek connected, the external one, and it writes the boot image, and then yep, you boot from it, and then you partition and format the storage device, and then you also can download the MS-DOS starter pack from the Phil's Computer website. That is something that will install a boot menu for the mouse, the optical drive, the memory managers, and just gets you up and running fast. Especially those of you who are not familiar with DOS, it can be quite a pain in the neck to configure. So this just will make your life easy. And after that, we are up and running and we can try some games. Now the mainboard uses an AT connector. So old power supplies had a connector coming from the power supply looking like this. Make sure the black wires are on the inside. Now you have a choice. You can purchase an old AT power supply, but I recommend not to do that. They're not very reliable. They actually might blow up and take all your vintage parts with them, so not recommended. This one is fairly straightforward. Your ATX power supply goes here. This goes to the 386 mainboard, and then you've got a power button to turn it on and off. Unfortunately, the sound card we're using today requires -5 volts, which modern power supplies do not have. So a couple of years ago, I purchased some of these adapters, and they have a voltage controller here that will create the -5 volts. Unfortunately, they don't seem to be around anymore. These adapters, you have to be aware, are hand soldered, and I haven't attempted to do one, but it seems to be a very tedious task, so I guess the seller just didn't think it was worth putting in the time and effort. And you can't charge too much for what is basically just a bunch of wires and a few plugs. And for sound, there are a lot of options. I'm going with a Sound Blaster 2 because that's what I've been using in a few recent videos. And this is also a sound card that requires -5 volts. This card has been upgraded to be compatible with the Game Blaster or the Creative Music System standard. It does FM, it's got an OPL2 chip, it does Sound Blaster for speech and sound effects, and it is a really good fit for games from that era. And so this is basically the completed machine with the I/O storage controller here. This is the graphics card, this is the sound card, and we already looked at the benchmarks. So now it's time to check out a few games. Not too many, but played a few games. Also the joystick port worked just fine. I connected the joystick to the sound card. I was worried initially that there might be a conflict with the game port on the I/O storage controller. And if you're wondering, I did look at the manual. There seems to be no jumper for the game port to disable it. However, the joystick worked fine on the Sound Blaster, so I guess joystick game ports can coexist without too many issues. But if you found otherwise, or you have something to share in this regard, do leave the comment down below. So now we're gonna have a look at some games.
I will speak with Prince Thrakarth alone. Guards, you are dismissed. Arise, grandson.
So guys, there you have it. We just built a 386SX running at 33 megahertz, and with a 3D Bench 1.0 score of 10 FPS, there are a ton of games you can play on this machine. Games like Monkey Island or The Secret of Monkey Island 2, the Indiana Jones, Fate of Atlantis, Wing Commander, even Wing Commander 2, all of these games are extremely playable on this machine. Now, a 386 has a very narrow focus in terms of games that you can play. You will quickly find that as soon as you try games that are 3D, for example Doom or Strike Commander, you will quickly see that this machine is not powerful enough. But on the other hand, you can play speed-sensitive games like Test Drive 3 and Wing Commander perfectly on this machine. Now, the parts are showcased. You don't have to use those parts. With the storage controller, the Goldstar Prime 2 just happens to be what I found works really well, so I have a few of them actually. With the ISA graphics card, basically for DOS gaming, it's not too important. There might be some slow cards out there, like one from Oak. These are video decelerators, so to speak. But slow is good. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And some cards might have, better compatibility with some games that use certain tricks for scrolling. But you can't go wrong with the Cirrus Logic. That's a good candidate with a good balance of speed, compatibility, and also a decent price, because most people chase other brands. For sound, there are so many options. People chase the perfect sound card. Good luck with that. It doesn't exist. Every card has pros and cons. The Sound Blaster 2 is a good fit. If you want some stereo sound, you can go with a Sound Blaster Pro. However, there are not too many games with stereo sound that run smooth on such a machine. There are a ton of demos, so if you're into running demos, then a Sound Blaster Pro might be an option. Of course, you can get a Gravis Ultrasound, Pro Audio Spectrum. There are lots of sound cards that you can use. And if you want to connect a Roland MT32, then you can use a MPU-4 or 1 MIDI interface. In terms of storage, you can use fairly modern devices, the Gotek floppy emulators. To me, these are a must. Now, I got a few comments on previous videos to check out the Flash Floppy project. I did. Unfortunately, it's not compatible with the external floppy emulator, which I want to use for Windows 10. So basically, I'm sticking with the stock BIOS. Works just fine for me. I've been using it for 6-7 years now without any issues. So my workflow is just fine. I don't see any need to upgrade. Maybe for the Amiga Flash Floppy or other home computers, that's useful. But for the PC, for me, the stock BIOS firmware works just fine. And for the hard drive, compact flash or SD storage is the way to go. And if you want to use an optical drive, that also checked out to work, and then you can play some games. For example, Rebel Assault. I'm not sure if this machine is fast enough for that one, but Fate of Atlantis, the talkie version, for example, and other games. There was a huge breakthrough when the optical discs came out. A lot of games suddenly had speech throughout, so that was really nice to see. So yeah, guys, now it's time for you to let me know, what do you think about this project? Did you have a 386SX? What speed? And yeah, what do you think about this machine? Fairly modern motherboard, nicely integrated. It doesn't have too many tweaking options, but that's not a bad thing, so it's very user friendly. And yeah, if you do come across one of these, make sure you check out the area around the battery. If it's leaking and the acid has made its way into the board, I would not buy it. There's a high risk that it's not going to work. Even if you attempt to repair it, the damage might already be done internally. Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I still don't understand why sellers that sell these vintage parts do not remove the battery. It's such an obvious killer of vintage parts. Yeah, but it is what it is. As long as you know, ask the seller to give you a high resolution photo around this area. I would not buy a mainboard without inspecting this area very carefully. And yeah, that's it, guys. Thank you for watching. Any questions, leave the comments down below. I do read every comment. You might not get a reply, but I read every comment. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you found this video interesting and you want to see more. And yep, thanks for watching. And I shall see you soon with another one.